This content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. Nothing contained on here constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, endorsement, or offer by Draper Goren Holm or any third-party service provider to buy or sell any securities or other financial instruments whatsoever. And we have an awesome media partner, Blockchain Radio, where all this audio gets circulated through their content and their listeners get to enjoy it. And you can catch this recording on our YouTube channel as well. So without further ado, I want to dive in right into today's topic. We're talking all about Bitcoin and what's been happening in the market the last week. With us, we have Bill and John. Guys, go ahead and give yourselves a quick intro so everyone knows who you are. We can start with Bill.
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Bill Barhydt, founder and CEO at Abra. I've been working in payments, financial services, crypto for the better part of 30 years. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
John.
Looking forward to the discussion.
Happy to chat with both of you guys. This is exciting. I'm John Farjo. I'm a co-founder and chief product officer for LunarCRUSH. We measure the pulse of the community. We measure hundreds of thousands of social posts every single day for every coin, try to make sense of them all. And we're having an awesome week. This is super fun to see everything going on and everyone getting excited and nobody sleeping. Saw lots of posts this morning, especially waking up to just craziness. Everyone was just excited about last night, I think. So fun times.
I love it. I love it. So before we actually dive into the topic, I know Bill, John, you guys are like OG in the crypto space, right? I want to hear your backgrounds, how you guys got started, and more specifically, what Bitcoin's price was at when you first joined crypto. So Bill, go ahead.
So I just got a comment on the chat that people were having a little trouble hearing me earlier. I just wanted to confirm that it sounds good now that you guys
we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So yeah. So I've got a little bit of a sorted background because for me, crypto didn't necessarily mean cryptocurrency. It meant cryptography. I was a cryptographer at the CIA and got into payments after that. I won't bore you with all the payments work, but in a nutshell, processed the first credit card transactions on the internet at Netscape and got into kind of cross-border payments about 15 years ago and read the white paper a few months after it was released. I kind of brushed it off. I thought that the way he was trying to solve the double spend problem was untenable because the idea was to use every computer in the world. And I didn't really think that was a realistic solution to the problem. Obviously, I was wrong. And revisited about a year later and had some friends that were already mining and started mining. It was probably about, 5 cents or something. I mean, you could actually buy it at that point, but it was easier to mine, kind of the opposite of today. And yeah, I gave a TED talk. I've been a 10-year member of TED, and I ended up giving a TED talk in 2011. I think it was now a little over $1, and that really threw me into the thick of this while I was working on my remittance company. And after I sold that company, I just really went all in on Bitcoin, and I've been in all.
So $1, that was the entry level for you.
Well, technically, you couldn't even buy it when I first read the paper because it occurred to me that would be a thing. But by the time I was really all in, and I was doing the research for the talk, I want to say between $1 and $5. I mean, the talk's online; you can actually see the price chart. I mean, I've got all the screenshots from Silk Road and all the stuff I was researching at the time.
Nice.
It's crazy.
And John.
So my story goes back. I got into crypto in 1985 when my dad would subscribe to the Wall Street Journal and hooked me when I was 7 years old onto looking at the prices of stocks and circling them, writing them down, following them. And I think, the habit kind of started there. And then I played baseball growing up for like 10 years and got into baseball cards. And go figure, man, it feels like baseball cards right now. It feels like you're learning what has value, liquidity, supply demand. You go to sell your cards to a card shop, you get half of what it's worth, and then they bargain with you. And so I think it kind of started way back then. And then around 2013, I was working at a large digital agency, I was running the user experience, the team there, largely working in automotive and things like that. And we were working on a project with The Walking Dead, and it was like with a car, and it was like this zombied out apocalypse vehicle. And one of the designers that I was working with was telling me about this Bitcoin thing. And I was like, what's that? What's that? Curious. He goes, yeah, you just got to set up this Mt. Gox account, and all will be great. Yeah, you can buy and sell right from there. Just hook up your bank account and start buying. And luckily, I got in around then and ended up keeping my coins. Long story there. I won't get into it today. But I want to say the price was in the mid hundreds to low 200s. And I've been buying ever since.
Nice.
I've learned a lot of lessons, but I wish I never sold. And there's a lot, I'll get into that later. But my story is that I've been hooked since 2013.
Okay. I love it. And what was the narrative around that time pertaining to Bitcoin, to crypto? I know people, I mean, at least I heard, I got into Bitcoin around, what was it, 2000, like late 2017. I first heard about it in 11th grade from one of my teachers, but I never really got into it until I got into college. So when you guys were in it, really, really early on, what was the narrative around that time around Bitcoin in general?
I mean, for me, there was no narrative. I mean, there was nobody. So you can't have a narrative if there's no people. So what can I say? I mean, at the time, like I said, I was very focused on remittances. I was very focused on kind of my libertarian perspective and like just pushing that constantly and all the time. My cypherpunk days when I had hair down on my shoulder, and and so that's what resonated with me. But there was no narrative because there was no people. And if you talk to anybody about it, they brushed it off. So it was probably 5 years before, there was even a small community of people you could have an intelligent conversation with beyond just the developers themselves. And you know how much you can talk to the developers about anything. So that was pretty limited. Yeah, I mean, I would say it was probably 4 years before there was even an answer to your question. That would have been nobody.
Nice. Okay. What about you, John?
It seems like, like anything in a technical space, we could be having the same conversation about artificial intelligence, and it starts out very technical, engineering focused, and you're learning about things. I mean, it's fun to learn about all these things that you never knew. I mean, I come from a user experience and the digital side. I've built lots of SaaS companies and applications. And, when you start getting into this new space, I wasn't a cryptographer. I didn't understand, like, what does a block size mean? What's an exchange? Like, why do I need an exchange? What's a wallet? And I think it started to hit what I read, Digital Gold from Nathaniel Popper back in the day. And that hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is historic. This is a big deal. That one right there, it's a classic. Everyone
Do you carry that with you everywhere you go, Bill?
Well, I've got them all right here. So I've got the Bitcoin, not to pick on that one. I've got this one. I've got Blockchain Revolution. Nice. So take your.
Nice.
I've got the bookshelf handy.
I am very impressed. That was pretty handy right there. That was cool. But I think what's interesting is even today. I mean, take the fact that anyone even watching this or in crypto is the minority by a long shot. And we have a lot of conversations that are very, very advanced. And then you have conversations with friends and family. And then in 2020, now they're asking, what's an exchange? What do I do? What should I buy? They have no conviction. They don't know what they're buying, so they'll sell it. They'll pay taxes on it. There's a huge gap between the rest of the world and where we are today.
Yeah. So it's funny that you say that. Everybody's talking about it. People are buying random stuff. So I got messaged by a ton of my friends and people that I haven't even talked to in a while, just DMing me saying, what's going on with Bitcoin? What's going on with crypto? And that typically, last time that happened was actually 2017, early 2018, right? And I remember at the time, it was around Thanksgiving, Christmas, and my family, we were sitting at the table at my uncle's house. And my uncle was sitting at the head of the table. He's like, oh, what is this Bitcoin? It's such a scam. it's hitting 20K. I should have bought in. He was saying it's a scam, but I should have bought it at 10K, right? And then I have another uncle that was saying, oh, I just bought Litecoin. I just bought this coin. And everybody was buying all these random coins just to stock up on their crypto, right? So a lot of that feels like similar to right now, but with not, it's not as aggressive as last time. I see you want to add something.
But here's the difference. Here's the difference. Back then, my answer would have been, but wait a minute. The government prints money without end. Isn't that a scam? And the average person would kind of roll their eyes a little bit. But now, I mean, we've printed how many $4 trillion this year arbitrarily. We made it up. So now you can actually make a very acute case to people that, hey, we print money without end as a government, right? Traditionally, money is meant to be a collectible, right? To back to the baseball card analogy, right? I originated something. I collected baseball cards. And so if money's a collectible and you keep printing more of it, right? My mother has a Mickey Mantle rookie card. Wow. We know how much it's worth because we know exactly how many of them there are. If she found out tomorrow there were 10x more than the amount that she thought, it would stand to reason that the value would be 1/10. Well, we print, we double the money supply every couple of years, but doesn't seem to resonate with the people you're talking about, that the money supply is worth half than what it was before, right? So it's not Bitcoin that's crazy. It's not Bitcoin's price that's going up. It's the dollar's price that's going down. And people have a very hard time, getting their arms around that. If we had a fixed, stable supply of dollars, right, and was guaranteed to be fixed, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now because nobody would care.
I hear you, John. Do you want to add to that?
I mean, it's funny. I almost relate this back to your last question about how was it back then, being in crypto, and I remember distinctly there was this anarchist mentality, this rebel mentality, this government is going to fall, dollars going to zero. Like there's a lot of that, and what's funny, not funny, what's crazy is when you look at what's going on today in 2020, it's almost like it's exactly come true. And what's crazy to me is like we weren't even talking about corporations having demand for Bitcoin. We weren't talking about PayPal buying 70% of all mined coins last month. We weren't having these conversations, and we certainly weren't saying, "Oh yeah, just a few of the largest companies in the United States are going to buy Bitcoin. There's still thousands more to go." We certainly weren't having that conversation, and we weren't having political uncertainty, which is happening. We weren't having endless money printing, as Bill just noted. And so like you look at just this macro picture, it's almost perfection when you think about it. And I mean, I'm sure we'll talk more about metrics later, but this rise in crypto so far, it hasn't even hit the media. It's not even, we're not even there.
Right. So like go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm just going to make a comment. So David made a comment in the chat section that he said money is a medium of exchange. It hasn't been a collectible since it was backed by gold and silver. Let's be really clear on and by money, I assume he meant government printed money. And the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, their goal is not to preserve your wealth. There's nothing, zero in their writ that includes preserving your wealth, right? They're managing an economy. And that economy basically is predicated on the unemployment rate and more or less inflation, but they're willing to sacrifice inflation for unemployment, right? And so they manage this house of cards by basically inflating the economy artificially, which is generally a kind of wealth redistribution from middle class to the uber rich. That's really what inflation ultimately is. And so there's nothing in their writ which has to do with wealth preservation in the first place, right? And so that's not acute for most people because honestly, most people die, right? If you live to be 125, which is probably going to happen in the next 100 years, right? And all of a sudden, your money is being devalued from 100 to zero, slowly, death by 1,000 cuts over 50 years. That problem becomes way more acute than it is today. It's acute today for some people, but it's going to be acute for a much bigger majority of people than we ever thought possible very soon.
I hear you. And John, you kind of brought up the whole point, a lot has changed since 2017 than right now, right? Other than COVID, which is like the obvious thing that might have affected or is affecting the crypto markets. Talk to me about some other milestones that have kind of happened along the road from the last spike to what's happening right now that is kind of influencing the whole market in general.
Well, one thing, it's kind of like investing in a startup. You can look at their product roadmap and you can evaluate it, but what you're really investing in is the team. And when I look at the team behind crypto, it's the smartest people I've ever met in my life. And there's every day, I mean, we're on a live stream every like 2 to 3 times a week with different, typically altcoins, right? Who have specific teams, they're startups. We're just blown away. And we're blown away with not like their, necessarily their creative tokenomic structure or anything like that. We're impressed with, man, these guys are building and they are delivering. And that right there, when you talk like about 2017, for example, when things were just soaring irrationally, going crazy with things that just had a white paper, you had, and then who knows where that money went, right? You had a completely different scenario than, like what we're seeing right now. I mean, every single, we've talked to Matic, Ocean Protocol, VIDT, Datalink, IOTEX, Utrust. Like I'm just spouting off a few in the last month. Just, it's like shocking how much they're delivering. And so I'd say like, for one, when you look at just delivery in general, it's here and it's accelerating. When you go back to 2017, it was decelerating and we had a financial mess on our hands. And so I think it's that mixed in with, look, like Bitcoin, the ecosystem around Bitcoin has changed, but I think it's a beautiful thing that Bitcoin itself is still just Bitcoin. And that's its strength. It's stronger and stronger, but Bitcoin itself is really just Bitcoin. And I think that's something to really pay a lot of attention to. There's a lot to be learned in that. You don't have to be the fastest blockchain that has all the whiz-bang features with a larger attack surface, let's put it that way. You have to be sound and safe and solid and secure. And there's no more secure network than Bitcoin. So I think like, it's interesting to be in this for a few years and just see like, wow, Bitcoin does nothing but get stronger. And that's why you're buying it.
Yeah. Bill, I see you nodding your head a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's an incredible time. I used to work in fixed income at Goldman Sachs. And so, it was very basic, right? Bond math is very different from equities, right? You basically do an analysis on interest rates and you can more or less tell a trader what he or she's going to make based upon what's going to happen. If this happens, you're going to make this much money. And if this happens, you're going to lose this much money. And I think Bitcoin is somewhere in between for me because the fundamentals are so, rigid, right? And the problem with that is that people are just not used to that. It actually relates to this idea of exponential thinking, right? My favorite analyst today in kind of traditional markets is Kathy Woods at ARK, and she specializes in what we call exponential thinking, and it's the same reason that people don't start saving early, right? People have a very hard time grasping what it means to get 10% interest over 50 years, right? People have a very hard time grasping what it means for Tesla to improve battery technology, improve supply chain on EV. And the same thing is happening in Bitcoin. It's basically this exponential technology that that people just really don't appreciate, right? Until it's too late in some way. And that's just human nature, right? I mean, Moore's law has made computing technology unbelievably predictable. Right. If you go back to 1990 and people talked about, genome sequencing and where we were and that it was going to be free when it cost $1 billion to do the first one, nobody believed that, or most people didn't believe that. Now it's free. Right. And so that's the nature of exponential technology. And so the time is ripe for a system that can take advantage of every computer, take advantage of infinite bandwidth, take advantage of infinite amount of CPU technology to basically undo this idea of infinite money printing, right? Infinite erosion of wealth. It just doesn't make sense anymore, right? And so the question that I continually think about is, when will it become obvious to everyone, which is what happens with all exponential technologies, right? The iPhone is obvious, the Android phone is obvious to us now, but it wasn't 20 years ago, right? And so I think that's to me, like, I don't know how to explain it, but there's an aha moment that everyone's going to have, because you have basically this acceptance of exponential technologies somewhere on a spectrum. Everyone has it, right? There's some people that have it, like, 20 years before everyone else. And there's a few laggards that have it 20 years after everyone else. And then there's the mainstream, right? And so we're so early in this regard in terms of Bitcoin. And so 2017 was an anomaly, because there was a retail euphoria, which really had nothing to do with Bitcoin. I mean, it could have been tulips again. It could have been anything. It really, honestly, and it pains me to say that, but it's true. Okay. But the difference today is that when I read what institutional investors are thinking about, right, they're thinking about the fundamentals of an asset that has a fixed supply, that is easy to move around, that gives people agency over wealth. And, that is very different than where we were before. So my belief is that as retail comes back, and we crushed it today at Abra, but a lot of it is, I'm going to say, a lot of it's based on the price. But I also I'm starting to see a trickle of users, retail users now, not institutional, that are really digging in, that are saying, hey, I understand it. I get these fundamentals. And so I do believe that we're going to get to a point over the next few years where there's going to be a huge swath of retail investors that really get the fundamentals of this, which was very different from 2017.
Yeah, I hear you. I want to jump into reading some headlines that came out over the last few months. And I think also it was over the last few months. So bear with me. So Decrypt reported in mid-October that 6.7 billion in Bitcoin is now held by public companies, right? MicroStrategy made headlines, one of the bigger headlines, with buying over $400 million worth of Bitcoin. And then you have Fidelity Investments, who has over 26 million customers, over 6.5 trillion in total customer assets, and more than 2.4 trillion in global assets under management, is now launching their first Bitcoin fund, right? Square announced it's buying $50 million of Bitcoin in October, and a couple weeks later, PayPal announces they're allowing users to buy, hold, and sell crypto. And just last week, a Citibank executive said Bitcoin could pass 300K by December 2021. A lot of these voices, a lot of these people that have never kind of spoken on Bitcoin were always disbelievers and always had their heads down when it came to this topic, are now rising to the surface, right? What's influencing that? What's happening in the world that's causing everyone to like wake up and start filling their bags?
I mean, I'll start this one. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but I mean, you've got, anytime you have global uncertainty in the past, it would be like, oh, government to the rescue. We have something better now, and the government can't fight it.
What does that mean exactly? What does that mean when you're not relying on the government anymore?
Well, I mean, if I don't have to just put my money in a bank account, I mean, like, I'll give you an example. I was talking to someone the other day that's lived off of only, and I mean only, crypto for the last 4 years. They closed their bank account. And I won't promote which project this was, but they closed their bank account. They are completely outside the system. They still pay their taxes apparently, but I haven't seen them. But you're able to do that, and I was shocked because I always think, well, I'm like, how do you pay for your house? How do you take that Uber? How do you, like, all those little things? I get maybe like buying a coffee or something, but there's a lot of small scenarios I don't understand, and they're doing it. And I think, yeah, that's probably really super fringe right there. It's definitely not what everyone's doing, but it is something that's going to get easier and easier. And none of that is bound by any government. And I think when you look at just the macro picture, for fiat currency, it's not good. It's as bad as I think we've all ever seen. And yes, COVID has a huge piece of that to blame, but that's more like it's igniting it versus, it's not something new. It's igniting it, just like how we're on these Zoom meetings and everything all day long now.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Just to build on what John said, I think it was Shamat who referred to Bitcoin at one point on CNBC as schmuck insurance, and I like that. But the reality is, and I agree with everything you're saying. I do believe that, as you know, the ultimate schmuck insurance basically says, okay, at some point the government's fucked it up so bad that Bitcoin is basically left holding the bag, pardon the pun. But on the other hand, I think that because we don't have any fiat-based money that's based upon sound money principles, it's inevitable, meaning that printing the money is an accelerant. Printing the money during COVID, I mean, in particular, but printing the money in general is an accelerant. It's not the bottom line, because the governments could undo this by going back to a gold standard, but it's not going to happen, right? Again, their writ is not to preserve your wealth. It's to manage an economy. My personal writ is to manage my wealth and take care of my family. I don't think about it in the context of what do I have to do to support the entire economy. That's not there's nothing in the basics of libertarian economics that talks about what is my, how do I support the entire economy? That's BS, right? So what my point is that Bitcoin was going to happen anyway. All of these things that are happening, Raoul Pal and Shamat and all these brilliant people, what they're talking about is awesome. It helps me create a narrative that most people can understand. But the reality is it's going to happen anyway. It's just a question of, does it happen a couple of years faster because the schmuck insurance kicks in, right? I think that we're talking about, maybe months and years difference because of all this extra money printing. Again, to me, it's an accelerant. It's not why. Yep. The why it happened 50 years ago, right? It's just that it creates an easier narrative for everyone to get their arms around, because 1% to 2% inflation, it's not painful in the moment. It's painful over 50 years, right? What's happening right now has the potential to be painful in some moment when hyperinflation kicks in, or God knows
so
what
talk
else.
about that for a second, right? Because there's all different types of people listening right now with all various experience levels, right? What do you mean by the hyperinflation comment you just made, right? So obviously we just got into COVID, the governments are printing money, right? So talk a little bit more about that.
So people have a hard time distinguishing. When you hear the word inflation, people immediately think of price inflation. That's not the best way to think about inflation, because price inflation is a trailing indicator. Currency inflation is a leading indicator, right? Meaning the printing of money today is the best indicator of where the value of those assets are going tomorrow, right? Why are stocks skyrocketing when we have depression level unemployment, right? Returns on these stocks are down, right? It's obvious why, so. I think that if you really think about it, again, it comes back to the baseball card analogy, right? What is a baseball card worth if I know there's this many today and 2 times that many tomorrow? Well, it stands to reason that tomorrow it's going to be worth half. People don't think about currency inflation correctly, right? People like Krugman, it's this big con. He just doesn't get it. He talks constantly about the fact that we need to print more money, but he never talks about the reckoning. The reckoning is in simple English, who the fuck is going to pay? If we're going to print money without end, it used to be, I used to think of it years ago in terms of my grandkids. Now I think of it in terms of my great-grandkids, my great-great-grandkids, my great-great-great-grandkids, because there's no end. But at some point I realized it's probably not going to be my great-great-great-great-great-grandkids, because the system has to collapse before then. No one in their right mind is going to continue to underwrite this debt to pass on to more and more and more ephemeral generations. This idea of we can just print all the money we want, and people accept that the United States Reserve or the US dollar is a reserve currency, so universal basic income will work. It's total red herring. It's bullshit. It's not going to happen, yeah. Right? Or if it does happen, it's going to be more accelerant towards what I'm talking about.
Bill is so dead on here.
There's
so many things I want to say.
Bill's fired up.
From the perspective of one that invests and holds Bitcoin, that what Bill just said should be your perspective, not I'm going to scalp a few bucks. Not, I'm going to, hey, dude, is it a good time to buy? It's always a good time to buy. If it's cheaper, you buy again. If it goes up, maybe you buy a little bit less. You buy what you can buy. You know, I giving the example of like, if I was a waiter and I got into Bitcoin into 2012 and I took a little bit of my paycheck constantly, maybe some of my tips, if I did that and I constantly invested through 2020, I would have made more than a doctor. But if I was scalping along the way, you know what I just did? I would have just paid taxes, and all of that money goes back to the government that's going to keep printing they're going to keep printing more money. And the problem here, you're not buying Bitcoin for yourself, you're buying it for your kids, and you're buying it for your kids' kids. And along the way, you may have some opportunities to, I don't know, like loan it out. Maybe you need some of that fiat currency. Maybe you got to buy a house or buy a car or pay for your kids' college. That doesn't mean you need to sell your coins. And so there's a real big opportunity in that. We're seeing that with things like Celsius, of course, and Nexo. But the bigger discussion, longer term, I will go on record here as having a prediction. Inheritance is going to become a major, major deal to discuss, because everyone, unfortunately, is going to die someday. And as they do, you do not want those coins locked up in some ledger that only they had the keys to. And, you know, we have a major issue ahead of ourselves here. And I know it's early because crypto's early, but this is a big discussion. And that is something that has to be dealt with.
Yeah. We get support tickets on the inheritance question all the time.
Really?
All the time. Yeah, all the time. It's as retail people have been in this for a few years, they're watching it grow. They really start to think about it. Hey, what's going to happen? What do I do with this private key again with Abra if I die? I'm generating 10% interest on these crypto assets. How do I allow my family to keep generating that and, you know, transfer it, et cetera, et cetera. So I agree with you 100% on that point. And I think that the other thing you said about payments, which I also agreed with. So payments are ephemeral, right? Wealth preservation is not ephemeral. This is part of, you know, I have a little bit of a disagreement with I'm friends with a lot of core developers. Okay. I've been at this for a long time. I know a lot of them personally. I funded some of them personally, but we disagree on a few things. Okay. I was initially attracted to Bitcoin as more of a payments rail, to be completely blunt and honest, as opposed to a store of value. And I've done a 180 on that, partially because Bitcoin is not a very good way to do payments yet. It will get there with Lightning and other technologies, but it's not quite there yet. And I'm really excited about that. But the reality is that most payments are ephemeral, meaning that once the payment is done, it doesn't really matter how you're storing the value on the other side, right? That's the promise of Libra, right? Libra basically said, we'll create this new currency because it doesn't really matter how you store what you receive on the other side. Meaning if you convert from dollars back to Bitcoin instantly, nobody really cares, right? And so David is correct. I was about to say exactly what David just said in the chat. You can use Bitcoin Cash for now to do a payment and go right back to Bitcoin. If the mining fees, you know, we had users in 17 that were paying $25 in mining fees for a couple of days, which is insane. If we go back to that, I have no problem putting 50 cents in Bitcoin Cash to make a payment and going right back to Bitcoin on the other side, because I don't really care what's in the middle, whether it's $1, Bitcoin Cash, some other shitcoin, makes no difference to me at that point, because I'm going right back to Bitcoin to store the wealth anyway, right? So whatever is ephemeral should be whatever easy and pervasive and accessible to the masses.
Yeah, I love it. John, go ahead.
We hear a lot from different coins that, you know, claim to be the best coin for payments, right? Some of these are Bitcoin forks and otherwise. And yeah, the reality is, I mean, when you're at the point of sale and you're making a transaction, you know what really matters is that it confirms immediately. It doesn't matter. That point of sale solution is probably going to accept 25 different coins if they're accepting crypto. And it's going to be no big deal. It just needs to be fast. So the person behind you in line isn't waiting for the block confirmation. So I think, you know, we've got a long ways to go for that to make a lot of sense. But I think the bigger question I would have is like, okay, here we are. Let's say I got lucky and bought Bitcoin at $4,000 this year when it tanked that one evening
in March,
that 1 hour period where everything went crazy down. And let's say I bought it right at the bottom. I think it hit 3,800 or something. And let's say I bought my cup of coffee today when Bitcoin was 19,000, whatever, 200. I'm paying taxes on that coffee. as if I sold my Bitcoin. In fact, that's short-term capital gains on top of that profit that I made in the United States, at least. And so that's got to be solved before we can really talk about I'm investing in Bitcoin and it's fast and the block time is quick and I've got Lightning Network. I'm paying taxes on those things, and you can still, like, there's a limit on your losses, but there's no limit on your gains. And that's a huge, huge, huge problem. I will never use my crypto to buy anything until that's fixed, until I've clarity around that. And then go try to report those transactions. Try reporting your 3,800 transactions a year, buying coffee and food and groceries. Have fun. It's not.
Well, the beauty of what's coming down the pipe with Lightning, think it through for a second, what you just said, right? So let's say that Bitcoin gets to where I think it's going to be in 5 years, which is 250,000. At that point, you start thinking the Satoshi as a unit will become commonplace, right? Because at that point, one Satoshi will be at about a quarter of a penny. So in other words, in today's dollars, before inflation, right? So it's about 2.5 cents for every 2.5 Satoshis for every 10 cents. So at that point, you can reckon in Satoshis. And if they basically tell you at Starbucks, hey, you're just paying me in sats via Lightning, you didn't do any kind of, you just did a transfer, a gift of Bitcoin effectively at that point, right? So there is no capital gains on that. You didn't go to dollars, right? And so I think that the other thing I'd say about this is that it's incredible to me that if you go read some of the papers from Rothbard and others in the Austrian School of Economics, they talked about this before Bitcoin existed, before the internet existed. They actually wrote about what would happen if we had a deflationary asset. And it's incredible. It's playing that concept of what they wrote is playing out in front of our eyes in real time. It's exactly what they wrote. Wish I had the link in front of me. I'd share it in the chat.
We'll get it later. We'll send it to everyone.
Yeah, please do. But basically the idea is that if there's a deflationary asset, which is what Bitcoin is, that's new, it will be hoarded. And again, I'm not explaining what's happening in Bitcoin. I'm explaining what they wrote decades ago. Okay. If there's a deflationary asset, it will be hoarded. At some point, the value of that deflationary asset reaches such stratospheric heights because everybody wants it, that the early adopters will loosen up their purse strings so that they don't mind, to them, spending a few sats on that cup of coffee. Right. It doesn't matter because they're so wealthy relative to the other wealth erosion that's happened. Okay. This is playing out in front of our eyes. Right. So at first, like I said, when I read the white paper, I was very much focused on P2P electronic money because my life was all about remittances at that point. But what I realized is you have to create the wealth first in order for people to care about using it as a payment mechanism, because payments in the West works really well. People don't complain about their ability to pay. They complain about having more money to be able to pay with in the first place. Right. So we're in this transition of, wealth preservation, which is going to lead to paying in sats. I promise you, if things continue as they are, we are going to be thinking in terms of prices, thinking about prices in terms of Satoshis in 5 to 10 years.
So stack your sats,
because nobody's going to
keep stacking, guys.
Exactly. But my point is, you're literally going to see prices quoted in sats at that point. Right. And that's when you know that in terms of that whole stock to flow model, that we've reached like the seventh level of the game. Right. Because now the dollar matters less and less.
It's fascinating. It's going to be super interesting to see how all of this plays out. John, I want to jump into the whole LunarCRUSH side of things. Obviously, you guys are data kings, queens, royals, whatever you want to call, right? I want to know. Yeah, exactly. I want some of that juicy data. What's happening on your end? What are some of the most interesting insights you found throughout the LunarCRUSH platform that everybody needs to know about? And just as a full disclaimer, LunarCRUSH is a portfolio company of Draper Goren Home, but continue. Go ahead.
Well, there's a few things. One is when we consider the fact that when we look, and we don't just measure, so let me clarify, we measure lots of different social activity, but let's start with like social mentions. So since we're talking about Bitcoin, we'll focus there. So anytime someone says Bitcoin, that could be the word Bitcoin. It could be ticker BTC, ticker Bitcoin. I'm sorry, hashtag Bitcoin, hashtag BTC, any variant of it. We're picking that up. And then we're also looking at it very deeply. So we're saying, so, hey, did Adam do a social post about Bitcoin? And when he did it, what kind of conversation took place after? And how much engagement was there? How many retweets and comments and likes? And then he took it over to Reddit. And then when he went to Reddit, there was a bunch of comments there, and there was a bunch of upvotes and more mentions of Bitcoin. And as we went through all of that stuff, what was the sentiment? And so we built a we used machine learning, built our own crypto-specific NLP library that's been hand-trained across tens of thousands of posts. And it keeps being trained more and more by humans, and it gets smarter. We can continue to optimize it. We also look and say, hey, did Adam have a link in his post? What did that link go to? What was that link about? Oh, it went to Abra, and it was also about Bitcoin. And so we capture that link and we spider that page. And so we've got all these different social metrics. And so when we look at things, you could kind of equate it to when, I'm sorry, I'm picking on you, Adam, as an example here. You're our case study. When Adam goes to his Twitter feed, Adam's seeing who he follows, maybe a couple degrees separated from that. And Adam thinks that he's figured out the market because he follows, 100 people. The reality is there's hundreds of thousands of people or millions, and you're only seeing a small piece of what's really going on. And you probably missed 99% of the news today. And so you could kind of think of that as like, that's Adam's view right now versus saying what happened over the last year constantly if I saw everything. And that's what we collect. And so the biggest, most fascinating thing here, does this have a screen share? Can I share my screen? Looks like this does work.
Bottom right, there's a screen share.
Yep.
Okay. I was sharing this entire conference. Okay, that's funny. Okay, so I've got Bitcoin here for the last year. So this is all the social volume, and we've captured about 41.2 million mentions of
Wow.
different specific posts. And so when we look at the spikes, I mean, I'll point out a few things. We've got this here was some Cash App posts. So Cash App, this is how much of a big deal Cash App is. Cash App was giving away Bitcoin. That's how big that went. 437,000 mentions in one day. Compare that to, this is the halving right here, which had 281,000. This was the Twitter hack when you had people like Kanye West and Elon and all sorts of celebrities and everyone. I think CZ got hacked, and that was a bunch of Bitcoin mentions. It was an anomaly, but it was one day just to give you some relative understanding. So we've gone all the way up here to where Bitcoin right now is $19,134.15. And yes, activity is higher, but I'm telling you, trust me when I say, to have 203,000 social mentions today so far, that is not exuberance. That's not even close.
It's nothing. Yeah.
So this kind of data, I don't want this to be a pitch. We want this to be something that's like useful to everyone, but it gives you conviction to understand where we're at. I'm no longer just looking at price. In fact, myself, this is why we built LunarCRUSH. We were trading based off of what we were on, like subconsciously understanding on social before. We wanted to capture more. And so I have ultimate conviction that we have not even gotten close to a top on anything. When you see that social volume, if you equate that to, in fact, let's look at individuals. Those 203,000 posts came from 74,417 people, individuals. So that's not a lot of people.
It's nothing.
It's early. And so the other side, I'm going to pull up, I want to look at 6 months actually on news. And when I look at news volume, because it becomes very clear. So again, we've rallied over the 6 months. It's gone up 96.23%. The price, as everyone stares at that price and asks if they should get in, the media has been so preoccupied with COVID and with politics that you can go to any mainstream news site, not a crypto specific site, not Cointelegraph, not CoinDesk, but go to any mainstream site and go and try and find some Bitcoin or anything crypto on their homepage. You'd be lucky to find anything. And, when you look at this, you start to realize that, in general, and we look at thousands of news websites out there. This isn't from like any specific service. This is any news article that's been posted across anything on any social channel that we collect. And, we're seeing numbers in the hundreds. We're seeing numbers, 1,412 back in May. We were higher 6 months ago with news based on Bitcoin. So again, like, not that many people talking about this and not a lot of news articles about this. It's increasing for sure. And if we hit a new high, it's definitely going to soar. But just giving some insight, that's what we're seeing. Obviously,
that's great.
Huge week. I'll stop sharing this thing.
Super cool.
And Bill, I want to hear from you.
News,
like, what has Abra been seeing?
We wrote a newsletter pretty much on this topic. I think it was 2 weeks ago. And one of my favorite books, I'm looking at the shelf, and to answer everybody's question, I don't have the floor. I'm actually standing next to a bookshelf. I don't have it here. One of my favorite books is The Art of Contrarian Thinking. I think that's what it's called, or something close. It's fantastic. Super thin, easy to read.
Bill, you need to put out a reading list,
and
like your summer reading list.
Like Tim Ferriss over here. I love it.
Yeah.
Sleeping list. But basically the idea is that when everyone's on the bus, it's time to get off the bus if you're an investor. When there's no one on the bus, it's time to start thinking about getting on the bus. As people are slowly getting on the bus, it's a really good time to get on the bus. Okay. So the way I interpret what John just said is that very slowly people are starting to get on the bus, because back in early 18, everyone got off the bus. Okay. So we're in this mode now where basically from a contrarian perspective, no one cares, which is incredible. Because if you think about it, right, Grayscale is buying up all the Grayscale, PayPal, Abra's a pittance compared to these guys, even though we're crushing it, right? Grayscale, Abra, Square are basically buying up everything. We love that because it just drives up the price, which creates more interest in our service. But if this is really from a contrarian perspective, zero, wow. And that's what we're seeing. Our retail sentiment analysis, because my day job is retail, I also run a hedge fund, which is institutional, but on the retail side, the sentiment is almost non-existent, even though our numbers are killing it right now. Process that for a second. That means in English, as people start paying attention to this, there is no Bitcoin to buy because those three companies are buying all of it.
So what's going to happen at that point?
Companies. That's only three.
Well, I told you what's going to happen. There's not enough Bitcoin to go around.
Right.
I gave you the example of where I think this is going in 5 years, right? So the price has to go up. If everybody wants those 10 Mickey Mantle baseball cards and there's only 10 and there's not going to be more, the price is going to go to infinity, right? It's just a question of how fast. And so, there's going to be peaks and valleys because it's not a huge march from retail to get it overnight. You've got a lot of traders in between who are basically making the market move while we're waiting for all those people from a contrarian perspective to start to get it, and they haven't gotten it yet.
So
awesome. And you know what else is interesting that we're seeing? I want to give a non-Bitcoin, because we talk a lot about altcoins all day long. Look at XRP, look at Stellar, look at what we've seen. Look at what's it called? Look at Litecoin that's moved up. And just understand that, when Ethereum moves up, it's billions of dollars. Right. And same with, I think XRP moved up, it was like $12 billion or something like that over the last week here. And when you look at that, it's sort of like this heads downstream. Everyone's waiting for that nice, beautiful wedge to form in Bitcoin where it looks like it's going to chill out for a little bit. And as that chills out, we see the large cap alts go nuts. You see billions of dollars move in, it trickles downstream. And when you think of some of these altcoins, like, it doesn't take much to move a Zelica or even like whatever, like Tezos. It doesn't take much to move them, relatively speaking. And so from an investing standpoint, see, I think what's fascinating is, like, when you talk to someone that's not in this space, there's the fundamental, here's the macro reason why you need to be in crypto. But all these people are asking you is, hey, can I make some money? so that I can exit crypto and go back to the fiat economy with more money. And it's interesting because a lot of them have that altcoin mentality, not the Bitcoin one. But we're telling them to buy Bitcoin, and we're telling them to get into DeFi and set up a MetaMask wallet and get into this food coin and like there's so many different groups that are out there that are really trying to get into this space right now. But I don't know. I'm gonna get back to Bitcoin since I know we're talking about Bitcoin. We could talk about alts all day.
No, I think this whole wave is very exciting. I kind of want to dive into the QA because we got a ton of interesting questions. So, first one comes from David. What's your vision for its future use? If Bitcoin hits 100,000 or even 1,000,000, do you sell or do you borrow against? Go ahead, anybody, take it upon yourselves. Yeah.
So I answered the question of what I think happens long term, which is what the Austrian economists have been describing for decades, right? You hoard an inflationary asset, eventually it becomes so valuable that the people who initially hoard it start to loosen up the purse strings, and eventually replaces soft money, which is money that is printed by the government in this case. I mean, in between, it's up to you. I might borrow against it if I needed to, you know, if I wanted to buy a house or something. If we haven't reached kind of peak hard money state, I might borrow against it because if I'm borrowing in soft money, that's cheaper. We'll see, especially if it happens in the next year, like I think it will in terms of the question.
Cool.
I think it's also like a personal decision. Look, I mean, if you can get off, like I kind of look at it like if you can get off the fiat economy entirely, if you can squash your debt, you can pay off your house, you can pay for your kids' college, you can have enough for retirement, and then still hold Bitcoin. Isn't that a dream? Isn't that amazing? And then take it further. What if you had so much Bitcoin and the solution probably doesn't even exist today? What if you had so much and it is so valuable, as Bill is saying? What if you could help the world with that in a really amazing way? You know, because if we do have a finite asset and we have everyone wanting it, well, it's also not right to just hoard it and hold it and no one else gets it. So there's got to be some things will be built. I guarantee that, to leverage that. And
so somebody made a comment to build on what John said. Somebody made a comment about this basically being about the uber rich and creating wealth issues, and I actually don't agree with that long term. And this might take a second, but let me explain what I mean. So I've done a lot of work in places in developing markets, places like Haiti and rural Mexico, Guatemala, and Philippines. And if you look at where hyperinflation happens, it tends to be in more developing markets where there's a lot of, all currencies fail, and all fiat currencies eventually will fail, but they tend to fail faster because they have governments that basically are out of control, a lot of fraud. They don't get it in terms of hyperinflation and currency inflation versus price inflation. But if you start using sats, I'm not using Bitcoin now, I'm talking sats because it's so valuable, we think in sats, as a currency in places like Haiti, like Guatemala, like the Philippines, like Tanzania, you know, where they're used to, you know, dealing with mobile phone-based payments. I think that the savings rate in those economies will skyrocket. I think that the opportunities for government-based fraud will plummet. I think the idea that fiat currencies will fail via hyperinflation will be a lost concept. And you'll start to see a transition over decades of wealth back from the wealthy to other countries as we make investments. And it's the opposite of what happens today. And so it's what I talked about before in terms of exponential thinking. If people are willing to sit down and think about what happens with existing currencies and the way emerging market economies are getting screwed by their own governments with its paper money that they print out of thin air, the opportunity for wealth creation is incredible. And wealth preservation at the same time is incredible.
I love it. And that next question, who's going to buy Bitcoin first? Bridgewater's Ray Dalio or Berkshire Hathaway's Warren Buffett?
Well,
I love this question.
I don't want to, the right question may be who's going to die first. I mean, I really wouldn't be surprised if one of them has it, either directly or indirectly, and we just don't know it.
I'm going to guess that Peter Schiff beat both of them to it.
Well, his son already bought it, right? So I would guess Dalio, because I just think that Buffett just doesn't care. He just doesn't care. I think Dalio has more of a global macroeconomic perspective in terms of where the big picture is all going, and he cares deeply about that. Whereas Buffett just cares about the returns on next year's reports, which is fine. Right. But I don't see him really caring from a macroeconomic perspective at this point in his life.
I think Buffett might buy a JPM coin first before Bitcoin. I see him more of a stable coin, bank coin kind of guy, since he owns so many bank shares.
I love it. Before we wrap up, I kind of want to hear your Bitcoin predictions. Bill, you gave a prediction for 2025 with 250K on your timeline. But what do you guys think is going to happen at the end of 2020 and entering 2021?
Go ahead, John.
You know, I haven't really thought about this enough, so I'm just going to go off the cuff. Bitcoin's going higher. Let's start there. I'm not going to give a number, but it is exponentially higher than where we are today. In fact, let's maybe set a timer. Let's meet again this exact time a year from now and see if these predictions hold true. But it's going to go more into a mainstream scenario. I think we're going to start to see millions of people talk about Bitcoin. And I think we're going to start to see millions of people buy Bitcoin. And I think when you start to see things like PayPal, for example, like what's the biggest friction point? And I see this in the people I talk to. What's the biggest friction point? What's an exchange? Why do we need an exchange? What's KYC? What's all that? Wait, I already have PayPal on my phone. I'll just use that. So that's happening. And so because it's literally 2 weeks into this, right? Like people still haven't even bought through PayPal yet or anything. You're going to see.
And by the way, they're pushing that very aggressively. I opened the PayPal app today. I got notifications to buy crypto everywhere.
Well, if you think, you'd be crazy to think that Google cannot follow this, or Facebook will not follow this, or Apple, they have to. They're being forced into following this.
Yeah.
And so I think when you start to see these kinds of organizations get involved here, you start to see mainstream adoption. So I'll make a social prediction. This day next year, we will see 3 million people talk about Bitcoin today, a year from now.
3 million. I'm gonna hold you to that. We'll meet again in 1 year and we'll see where it's at.
We should tweet it. We can set a remind me tweet, and it'll remind us a year from today.
Yeah. Okay.
I love sentiment analysis. I mean, I think that with some of the mainstream payment apps getting into crypto, and some of this central bank digital currency stuff happening in China, Africa, and other places, I think, and Libra, which everybody's kind of laughed off, but I have not laughed off. I mean, the reason everybody cares about Libra is not because the technology is interesting. It's because they have billions of users that they're going to tap into, right? So I think the sentiment analysis that you're doing is going to be really interesting over the next year. From a price perspective, we're headed to 100,000. I honestly think it's going to get there by the end of next year. I'd be very surprised if it doesn't. I was hoping we would get down to 3,500 or so last year. When that happened, I was really excited because I felt like, okay, we've undone all the tulip stuff, and now we can start to have a fundamentals conversation and build on that. And that's exactly what's happened. So I'm really excited about that. And nothing goes straight up. So, I wouldn't be surprised if we get to 50 and go back down to 15 again. And I don't really care. But I do think we're going to get to that 100K in the next year. And we'll see what happens between then and the next halving. But I also think that we're going to start to see like dozens of new payment apps that use Lightning, but also that use Bitcoin Cash and other competing technologies, which is totally fine. Again, I think I have less concern about payments because it's ephemeral. But I do think that Bitcoin's future for payments is huge. It's just not the focus right now for most people. So that's my simple prediction for the next year.
Cool. And one last question. What altcoin are you guys watching heavily?
We watch
Well,
2,000 of them every day, and we
Good
rank
answer,
them. We
John.
rank them based upon social and market performance on our leaderboard on LunarCRUSH.com. So I'll tell you, it's free to sign up. You can just go to LunarCRUSH.com and sign up.
Good answer.
super cool site, John.
Thank you.
I mean, we have 125 of them being traded, and the trading volume today was just enormous. And it's different every day. Personally, there's a couple that I'm interested in from a technology perspective, not necessarily from a money-making perspective.
Yep.
Cardano, I'm super bullish on. ADA, for those of you who track that, I think that what they're doing from a tech perspective is really interesting. That's probably the one that I would shill the first. I have no vested interest in it. I think the Filecoin project, independent of the coin, I don't own any Filecoin. I think it's crazy what's going on there, but independent of the coin, I think the idea of decentralization in data management is super interesting. So I'm pretty bullish on the idea of Filecoin. We'll see if the reality kind of matches the vision. And then the last thing I'd say is, in terms of DeFi, I'm super bullish, like 5 years out, on DeFi becoming mainstream in the background for most users. I think services like Abra will put a usable front end on DeFi, but we watch it really closely. What's happening with a lot of the first generation services like Uniswap and Link and other comp and other services is really interesting to us. And again, not focused so much on the price of the coins, but just on the value proposition of decentralization.
Awesome.
Can I make one more prediction?
Yeah, of course.
On DeFi. So we've gotten very used to making the assumption that Bitcoin is the front door to crypto, and then you go elsewhere, you invest in other coins. I predict that DeFi will be the front door into crypto, and most users won't even know it. And I say that because again, we're talking to small audiences today. In 2020, it's still a small audience. And that small audience has gotten used to this regimen with how things work and how the whole ecosystem functions. And when you talk about DeFi, what you're really saying is, do you want to earn 0.005% interest at your bank, or do you want to earn 8% on that dollar? It can stay $1, even though it's being tokenized and put into a smart contract. Call it $1. You're going to earn 8% on that dollar. How's that sound? That is the best sell ever for mainstream. Not Bitcoin volatility, not I need to figure out how to do all these things and figure out, and check the prices. Where am I going? Like it's complicated. Bitcoin will be the king, but the front door may be DeFi. The problem today is security and just feeling warm and fuzzy about convincing grandma to put her money into a DeFi project. Please tell her to not get into Pickle or anything else that got hacked over the last week here. And it's like, that's the problem today. And so, but that'll change. That's going to change. It's early days, and a big winner in that space will figure out how to make people feel warm and fuzzy and secure and have insurance and don't worry. And that's the problem. You worry. So you're not going to put a big nest egg in there. You're going to experiment. You're going to put a little bit of money. So the big money is on the sidelines until people feel good. But I predict that DeFi is going to be the front door into crypto.
Cool, guys. Well, this has been personally one of my favorite topics on Blockchain and Booze. So I thank you guys. Cheers one last time for being on Blockchain and Booze. It was so great to have you, John. So great to have you, Bill. I think Bill froze on my end. Is he frozen on your end?
I thought he was smiling.
Oh, well, anyways, we've been having issues with Remo and my Wi-Fi and his Wi-Fi, and everybody's just overusing their networks right now, but it's all good. Not to worry. So that's the end of Blockchain and Booze, you guys. Thank you so much for being here. Before we break off, I want to, and Bill broke off. Before we break off, I want to go ahead and introduce our next section, the networking, which is personally my favorite part of this whole entire segment. Right now, I'm going to end presentation mode, and we're going to break off into this networking session where everybody that's watching will be distributed to these colorful tables where we'll all be able to interact and meet one another. So in order to do so, I'm going to end this presentation mode. Make sure to have your cameras on. Make sure to have your microphones on. Otherwise, you're going to be extremely confused. All right? Oh, we have Bill back. There he is. Bill,
Sorry,
we did. No problem. We did a toast. Thank you for being
All
here.
right.
And we're gonna do this again 1 year from now to see where all of our predictions are.
I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you got it.
Great to meet
All
you.
right, guys. Yes, mic's on, camera's on. We'll see you at the networking. Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you next week.
Take care, everyone.